Okay, hey y'all, your 10-minute grace period is over. And just in case you think I'm a stickler for time, I gave you an extra minute. So here's what we're going to do, because a lot of you have been kind enough to come even though you have flights that have to leave early. I want to be able for you to take some of this back. And because we are people of culture who believe in prayer, I'm going to ask the chair of our business committee, business and transportation, energy and transportation, the Honorable Senator from the great state of Ohio, by way of that city on the lake, Cleveland, the Honorable Sandra Williams, if she would come and offer a word of prayer for us. Senator.
Thank you, Madam President. Can we all bow our heads, please? Father God, I want to thank you for bringing us together again today. This has been a fabulous conference, meeting with people from all over the United States of America, listening and learning about what we can do to better our people. Our president has offered us great knowledge during her time here, and I just want to thank her for all that she has done. Now, in our last session, I ask that you continue to open our minds and our hearts and leave us here, leave us with knowledge that we can take back to our community. I also want to ask for everyone's traveling grace back to their communities. Amen.
Thank you, Senator. The great representative from Alabama has an announcement to make, and I'm going to ask her to do that now because some of the members have to leave, and I want to make sure, you know, I like everybody to be on the same page. I don't want y'all going back and then when you see something, well, ain't nobody told me that, I ain't heard that when they did that. So, Madam Representative Laura Hall, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam President. Good morning, everyone. So now, if you enjoyed yourself as much as I did, I'd like a better response to that good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Excellent. On the weekend of March 1st, which would be February 29th, March 1st, you know, for each year, we have had what is called a Selma to Montgomery March. And so, along with Mr. Cleo Washington, we are extending an invitation for NBCSL to be an active participant that weekend in the Montgomery to Selma, or Selma to Montgomery March. And so that is why I'm standing before you to make sure that you are aware that that weekend, the weekend of March 1st, that the Selma to Montgomery March will take place. And once the office send out information, we will let you know what all of that looks like. So I would ask you if you would please join us. It should be a great weekend and an informative one. And a big thank you to our president. I told her earlier, last night was one of the most meaningful and informative night in terms of recognition that I've had. And thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Well, for those of you who are coming in, come on down, come on down. You know, I pretend y'all are all Baptists and sit in the back of the church, so come on down so the photographer can get some good shots. But again, trying to be cognizant of your time. I know that some of you have to leave. You've got early flights, and we want you to be able to at least take away something from this. This is our closing ceremony. This is the end of what we hope, as has been pointed out, has been an informative 4 or 5 days, however long we've been here for you. What we are doing this morning, we've had a lot of conversation about the opportunity zone. But those of you who know me know that my philosophy pretty much is let's deal with where we are. And I'm saying that to say through our resolutions process, the committee chaired by Senator James Sanders of New York, we have addressed what NBCSL has identified as concerns or suggestions for tweaks. So we don't need to spend time in here talking about that. That was done through the resolutions process. And because we have officials from the federal, state, and local level, but in particular, and Ms. Adrian, I'm not stealing your thunder, I'm just trying to make the point about the resolutions, there is always, at the end of our resolution, a line that says, and a copy of this resolution shall be presented to the President, to Congress, and blah, blah, blah. Well, y'all, we have an opportunity in here this morning to present a copy of the resolution to a person in the President's office who will be introduced later. That's a little tease for those of you who want to just ease on out. I'm just so excited that for the first time since I've been coming, NBCSL is in a position to present a copy of its resolution addressing an issue to an official person with the White House. Bottom line, what we want you to do is recognize the opportunity that you are going to be getting here this morning. We've got people from state, federal, and local to talk to you specifically about how you can go back to your communities and look at your district. There are areas which have been designated as opportunity zones. It's time for us to not just talk the talk, but walk the walk. Not interested in a whole bunch of complaining. These people didn't come here to hear that. They hear that on a daily basis. Bottom line for me, I want y'all to go back wherever you came from and say, you know, we shoulda, woulda, coulda, asked this, that, or the other. I want us to be able to take advantage of this. I'm talking too much. I'm not who you here to hear. You didn't come to hear me. You don't have to hear me much more after today, so that's a good thing. Clap for that, y'all. But Adrian, come on up, baby, and let me introduce you. See how tepid that clap was? See how tepid that was? Let me introduce the Honorable Miss Adrian Clark, and she said, only because she knows me and Aaron Harris, is she up this early in the morning and looking good to do this. Adrian Clark, Department of Transportation. Give her a hand.
Thank you. All right. Thank you so much, Madam President. No, it's my pleasure to be here. I did say that for a Saturday morning, but I know this is some special business, and we certainly all need to be here. Good morning to everyone. It's certainly my pleasure to be here. As stated, my name is Adriana Clark. I'm with the United States Department of Transportation, specifically the Office of Small Business. And I bring you greetings on behalf of Secretary of Transportation, as Secretary Elaine Chao, and my office, the Director Willis Morris for Office of Small Business. And hopefully there will be an opportunity to tell a little bit more about USDOT. And with respect to opportunity zones, everything infrastructure is under the U.S. Department of Transportation, and perhaps there'll be an occasion. But I look forward to engaging everyone here. I know that this is a special time. So again, Madam President, thank you all for allowing me an opportunity to join you this morning. So we're going to get started with introductions. And I think for our first, the first person that's going to come before you to talk to us specifically about water opportunity zones, some of the pros and cons, it is my pleasure and certainly my distinct honor to bring before you Mr. Jerome Smith, who serves as a Deputy Assistant to the President for the White House Office of American Innovation, where he spearheads the initiatives such as criminal justice reform, workforce development, opportunity zones, and others. Mr. Smith, it is a pleasure to have you. Thank you for presenting this information to this body, and we look forward to receiving it. If you would join us, please.
Wow, many blessings to you, and thank you for the very warm introduction. And I'm very thankful to Ms. Gilda. You've been an amazing leader and pioneer, and I'm happy to be connected with your leadership. You know, I had the pleasure of speaking to the executive committee. I may be getting the titles and stuff confused, but I know it was the executive committee for your trade association or your association or your caucus. And we talked very early about opportunity zones, what it is and what it isn't. And I had opportunity to introduce myself and talk about the work that I've been blessed to be able to serve in. I'm just going to start just giving you some background on myself, because many of you probably don't know who I am or the work I do in the White House. It's always interesting. I thought last night, how to best connect, right? Because I think once you get a foundational understanding of the people, because we're in the people business, you all are state elected. But if you get that foundation and that connectivity, and you build this thing I call trust, then we can work in good faith, and be honest with each other and start cultivating a process in a way that can create some real social change. And so, I'm from Cleveland, Ohio, born and raised, and I moved to Washington, D.C. when I was 18 years old, went to Howard University, graduated. There we go. Went to Howard University, got my BBA in finance, and I never thought in a million years, just to be honest with you, that I would grow up and work in politics, and not just work in politics, but work as a Republican, right? I'm from a blue collar town, raised by my dad, single father dad. And I heard a lot about Ronald Reagan, not in a good light growing up. So it's like, everyone calls my dad Willie K. They're like, Willie K, your son's a Republican? It's like, yeah. But that's my path, and we have a very interesting God that, like, sometimes you end up places that you never thought you would be in by the grace of God, and that's what brought me here today. But the heart of that is being very intentional about, what it takes to kind of rebuild community in some of our inner cities. And I say the intentionality piece because, I come from that environment, inner city Cleveland. And so the thing is, most people that you meet from Cleveland aren't even really from Cleveland. They're from some suburb of Cleveland, they say the west side, east side, and only Clevelanders can expose each other. And you know this, right? It's true. But I grew up on the east side of Cleveland. My family grew up in the state reps area, Garden Valley. And, I grew up around it all. I seen jobs leave our community because of, trade deals that didn't really work out for our community. Right when we were like growing a growing middle class in those communities. And then you had the drugs come in, and we've had 30 years of this ecosystem where there's not that connectivity between, lower class and upper middle class. There's been a huge gap, and I even moved back to Cleveland after spending my time working in D.C. right out of college, because like I said, I fell into like Republican politics. I moved back home to try to, make a difference. And it was so hard because, I don't come from certain background and people didn't know who I was, It's crazy how God works, right? I'm going back to my hometown now and connecting with all of those individuals that I tried to connect with 11 years ago, but with the same intention. And that intention still remains the same, and that's changing the environment of what I saw and what I grew up in, because our people can't wait for change. It's about opportunity now and what we can do right now. It's not about election, it's not about politics, it's about what we can actually get done together. And so, I don't come here to kind of preach some orthodoxy or, try to convince you to support an agenda. Only agenda that I'm focused on is results for the community of the least of these. And the community that I came from, which happened to be an African-American community, that is a similar situation in all of these communities. So I just wanted to say that first, because that connectivity and that intentionality is what brought me here today, with connecting me with Aaron and helped connect me with Gilda and help me get here today to have an honest conversation, all right? So through that whole voyage, you know, I packed up my car because it didn't work out like I thought it would in Cleveland for me. 11 years ago, I moved back to Washington, D.C., and I said, God, you know, I'm going to put everything in your hands and let you take care of the rest, right? 11 years ago, when I came back to D.C., you know, since I had interned and worked in politics when I was in college, I was able to get an opportunity. You start off on the Hill working as a staff assistant. Some people say like staff ass. That was like the short way of saying that. I used to tell people I was staff ass of the year 3 years in a row. I mean, that doesn't really that doesn't really exist, but that's how I used to talk about it. Because it's you know, with service and stuff, and many of you know this, you know, you start off really working for free almost. You know, and you have people on your teams working for free and just service. And, you know, so I started just literally working the front desk, you know, but very intentional. And when I got the opportunity to kind of talk about policy and learn it, you know, I went and worked on the Republican Study Committee, and I was tasked with a lot of different responsibilities, but my ask was, what's our solution to poverty? And I'm not just talking about welfare reform, because, you know, Republicans, when you talk about poverty, it's just welfare, right, reform and stuff like that. And I was like, Republicans have to have an answer to this, because at the end of the day, you know, regardless of who's in leadership, you know, we need people at the table very intentionally moving the ball forward for our community, right? And without Republicans having a clear agenda of how it impacts us, you know, we wouldn't have that leverage to kind of really move the ball forward and have that accountability. And so divine time is an interesting thing. You know, I started the Anti-Poverty Caucus, focused on opportunity, and I met a man named Senator Tim Scott as a freshman congressman. And Tim Scott, you know, was very intentional. We had like-minded kind of understanding and similar backgrounds. And Senator Scott, when he became a senator, he brought me over to work on his opportunity agenda. And that's what came out of that's what introduced me to this whole Opportunity Zone concept, working with Tim Scott. So we came up with the term Opportunity Zone. And we used to joke back then, like, what were we gonna call these, ozones? Yes, that's what we know, right? That is really called ozones. And so I just wanted to give you that background because I think it's important, because the Opportunity Zone legislation is not an initiative or government program like we know traditionally. You know, historically, the federal government has done a terrible job of tracking what works and how do you revitalize a community. I mean, I don't have to tell you all this because, you know, many of the programs that existed before Opportunity Zones, we spend billions of dollars federally, but it hasn't changed some of the communities. You know, I used to always say that some communities in Cleveland still look the same way since the riots, right? Then I found it's the same way in Detroit. You know, it's the same way in some rural parts of Mississippi and South Carolina. You know, this exists, right? But yet we're pouring all of this money into these communities, right? And so the mission behind Opportunity Zones was to take that power away from the federal government and give it back to the localities, right, through access to capital. However, without having a one-size-fit-all approach towards it, to allow for flexibility. And so that's why it's important today to kind of have this discussion, because all the activity you've seen on Opportunity Zones has been pre-market activity, to be honest with you, because the rules for Opportunity Zones won't be finalized until the end of this year, in the next 2 weeks. You know, so when I talk about intentionality and meeting with Gilda, I wanted to make sure, African American leaders were at the table from day one. And that's been hard. It's been very hard. and I get it. I get it because, politics is real, right? And so, coming to talk to people, there's like, oh, who's this black guy working for the Trump administration, but I'm a persistent guy, and I'm here. And, I'm not giving you a whole dialogue on opportunity zones right now because I think the connectivity piece, building trust, is the most important aspect. Now, I had to have you understand the point of view of where we're coming from and what we're trying to do, right? You can ask me all the questions you want. Like we're going to have that time, and I'll answer questions all the way until I'm going to the airport. But the mission behind it is about social impact. There's a movement of brewing right now in America. It's a movement. You know what that movement's about? The most important piece of capital in this country, which is human capital. People are starting to realize that we can no longer compete on a global scale if everyone isn't on that ladder of opportunity in America. I spent a year in administration negotiating criminal justice reform, trying to right the wrongs of, well-intentioned policies to kind of create safe communities, but which ended up putting a lot of our people behind bars and disconnecting families. Now that we're trying to turn that around, we can't forget that how that started in the first place, lack of opportunity. Lack of opportunity. I mean, around the world, almost every place you go to, where you have problems and corruption and issues, starts with opportunity, right? But it's a movement of brewing where people are realizing that we must harness our most precious asset, which is human capital. And so opportunity zones is going to look different in every locality. But in order for it to work, we have to be very intentional, very intentional. And that's where I need your help. I spent the last 2 days with my friend here, Keith, who we met. God is good. We can clap for Keith. Because I tell you, Keith is holding it down as an African American, Democrat, working for a Republican mayor, because politics aside, he's very intentional about changing the community. And, God brought us together through relationship. And I came down here because I told him, hey, we want to create this connectivity. I was like, look, Keith, what's the key word of this weekend? Connectivity, right? And so that's what brings me here with you all to discuss that connectivity. Then we have Jamal here, Jamal I met probably like 8 years ago. Was you just leaving law school around that time? And then all of a sudden he's over economic development for the state, for the governor, right? Now the governor is just getting started on opportunity zone stuff because he inherited it. And some of you inherited opportunity zones and weren't a part of the process, And so you're looking at like almost 3 different places on opportunity zones. I'm, of course, the expert because I know everything about it, right from the conception. But then Keith got involved in it probably like a year and a half ago. And Jamal is just now getting out the gate. But in order for opportunity zones to work, we need to have a federal strategy, a state strategy, and a local strategy. And you all are local leaders. And that's the conversations we're going to have today. It's about what's the strategy? How can we leverage the tool? Because opportunity zones, the legislation is just a tool. What I did federally is on top of that tool was create a White House executive order that created the White House Opportunity Revitalization Council that takes 17 different agencies. And then around opportunity zones, we've committed 170 agency actions for social impact in those opportunity zones. Because it's an economic development tool, not so much a community development tool. Because what makes opportunity zones sustainable is it has to be market-driven, private investments. But we didn't want to just stop there because we know people can just do good. But we want people to do well and do good for the community. And so having incentives to create a social impact is extremely important. And so we took our economic development resources, our community development resources, our workforce development resources, our entrepreneurship resources, our safe community resources, and focused them in those zones. You can go to opportunityzones.gov, go to local leaders tab, and you will see 170 agency actions, almost $20 billion of federal funding, for things like affordable housing, or workforce development, or reentry training, or mentoring, or Head Start, or health clinics, all focused in opportunity zones, because we realize that the economics is good to have that, but you got to build that connectivity to the community for social impact. But in order to connect those dots, you need local leaders with strategy. We're giving you all the flexibility and all the tools to do that. And the best states that's doing it well have a state strategy, have a city strategy. Mayor Suarez has built his whole strategy around affordable housing. Because a place like New York, right, you have density, people can't afford to live there that live in that community, so it leads to things like displacement. But this mayor is being very intentional and saying, like, I'm going to use this to build more affordable housing, more workforce housing, so that people that live in these communities that are being revitalized are a part of it. But we can't do that just from the federal system. We have to partner with local leaders like yourself, and you have to have a strategy. Because I told you about 170 programs, right? It's hard to be very intentional with 170 programs, right? And that's the whole thing, that's the magic, because some places it's not affordable housing, it's just jobs, and small businesses. And we have those resources for that. Or it's just having a safe community to bring jobs and small businesses. And so I look forward to our dialogue, but at the heart of it, there's 3 points that's extremely important. Being intentional, having that connectivity, and collaboration. I appreciate you for giving me some time to just share with you a little bit about myself, and I hope that in our dialogue, we can figure out a strategy to best empower the communities you represent. Look forward to building with you. Thanks so much.
Okay, so we have a charge thereby given to this body, and it has to do with connectivity. So that theme, Darin, that you've left us with today, gives us the motivation and what it takes to move forward, even as we go throughout the conversations that we're having today, to think about, as we think about opportunity zones and how that may impact our respective communities, think about this theme of connectivity. So thank you for those remarks. So, for us, again, for NBCSL, this is not just about politics of today. This conversation is about the social impact, as Darin has stated. And so how this is affecting our communities is what we really want to focus on. Our next presenter on the topic of how to be engaged from a state perspective, I'd like to welcome to the podium Mr. Jamal Sawell. Mr. Sawell is the Florida Secretary of Commerce, President and CEO, Enterprise Florida, Inc. As President and CEO, Mr. Jamal Allen Sawell leads Enterprise Florida, the principal economic development organization for the state of Florida. With his team, Sawell works closely with economic development partners and private sector businesses across the state to strengthen and diversify Florida's economy. We are pleased to have you here. We look forward to your comments. Thank you for being here.
All right, so I was born and raised here in Florida. I'm from Orlando, Florida. So in Florida, what we say the further south you go, the further north you get. And the further north you go, the further south you get. So my parents are from North Florida. I was born and raised in Orlando. And in Florida culture, they would call us country. And so for us, it's, so for those who are from South Carolina, Alabama, I got family in those cities, Columbia, Utah, Alabama, and other places. And Tajaron Wells, I see you over there, all right? Yeah, right from Columbia, attorney. And so, that being said, over the years I've been involved, whether it was DC life, life in Florida, it always took me around the world. My brothers are preachers, so I grew up wanting to be a pastor. My major in college was in religion. And I realized once I started to see what was going on behind the scenes, I said, well, I'll pass on that. But I appreciate those who are in the ministry, because there's a lot of administration that people don't see. There's a lot of counseling that people don't see. And I'd rather realize that, let me take those skills outside of the church in terms of business and politics and policy. And that's really is a part of what I do. And so with that being said, in the state, we have an exciting time. We're in a major transition. This is the first governor that we've had who was not a baby boomer. First governor in 25 years who was actually born in Florida. The past 3 governors weren't born in Florida. And why I said that is that Florida is so unique. Unlike any other state in the South, Florida, about 33% of the state is from Florida. I know in states like South Carolina, Alabama, unless you're an 8th generation native, you're not even about to be on the ballot. But in Florida, it doesn't really matter because everybody is from somewhere else. You can literally, we had someone who moved here in 2003, became governor in 2010. In Alabama, unless you went to ASU, Alabama A&M, Auburn, any of those schools, that's just not going to happen. So Florida, the reason why I said that, because with business, it makes it so special. Somebody can come here with an idea. Somebody can come here with a vision, and they can do well and not have to join the right country club, not have to be a part of a certain family, not have to come from a certain lineage, because everybody in Florida is from somewhere else. Down here in South Florida, all my friends are Haitian or Jamaican or Trinidadian or West Indian. So growing up in Florida, people would say, Jamal, like, where you from? I would say, well, I'm from Florida. They said, well, where you really from? I'm like, well, I was born and raised in Orlando. And they were like, well, you're not Haitian or Jamaican or Trinidadian? Like, no. They're like, are you just black? And I'm like, yeah, just regular, I guess. So for those who are from Florida, you know what I'm talking about. You know exactly what I'm talking about. So for us, in Florida, we have a great business environment. And the thing that I focused on specifically is marketing the state, matchmaking, and obviously focusing on opportunity funds. Those who may not know about the opportunity zones, is still growing. It's something that has been handed to me with a new governor who's really interested in growing this program. But opportunity zones businesses must earn at least 50% of its gross income from business activities within the opportunity zone. That right there is key. And so for us, the program is built to influence investor behavior rather than that of individual companies. It aims to draw some of the capital currently tied up in financial markets and on the sidelines of the real economy into the businesses of rebuilding distressed communities. There are no upfront tax credits or subsidies, only graduated incentives tied to long-term holdings and patient capital. So those who are community leaders have less of a project-by-project transactional role to play here and more of an ongoing ecosystem that is building every single day. We are focusing on the worst parts that people may have forgotten, whether it's here in South Florida, in Liberty City, Overtown, or where I'm from in Orlando, Pine Hills. That's where we are focusing on, and there's so much to do there. But also in Florida, we have 427 designated opportunity zones, so 427 low-income tracts. And the poverty rate for such a tract is at least 20%. In the case of a tract not located within a metropolitan area, the median family income for such tract does not exceed 80% of statewide median family income. At times, we always talk about opportunity zones to think of urban areas, but here in Florida, we all are also focusing on the rural areas, the panhandle, the area in Florida that we call the muck, that people may forget about. That's really has been a focus of ours because in terms of hurricanes, the impact, but also Florida as a state, we have a growing state. So each state usually has its own economic development officer. And for us, we really make it a focus for rural areas, just not so people are thinking about the urban areas, but when we tell businesses about investing, when we tell companies about relocating, And also in terms of opportunity funds, we also really highlight those rural areas. So for those who have a state economic development officer or your governor's office, wherever it falls, the rural focus is a plus. Because I know like many of our communities, we may, some of us have roots in those rural areas, and people are not necessarily opposed to moving back. They just want more opportunity. So in Miami, we have about 28 opportunity zone low-income tracts. Tampa has 24. Jackson was 21. So approximately 1.9 million residents in Florida live in the 427 opportunity zones. So we are gearing up our efforts for us as we market that. We have a website at Enterprise Florida called Find It Florida site. So people can go on the site and see what we have. At Enterprise Florida, technically, we were the former Department of Commerce. Then around 1996, they then transitioned that into a public-private partnership. So for us, we have the best of both worlds. We have government officials who sit on our board, but also we have people who are on the board who are from the private sector. So we have currently about 19 estimated qualified opportunity funds investing within the state, and we want to see more. That right there is key in terms of for those who are from certain areas, they may not know how to get in touch with those funds. So that right there is critical as we tell those in areas that are OZs, like who are the opportunity funds, where they're from, and how to get in touch with them, because they need to then have access to those resources. So right now, the Governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, has requested about $250,000 in his budget proposal to the legislature to fund the Opportunity Zone marketing and technical assistance. As a state, what we do, we really market the zones, talk to those officials. One official who's very engaged in Florida is State Rep Anika Onfray. This is her passion. This is really something that she has taken charge of in regards to telling not only the executive branch but others what we need as a Florida to then market those zones. Obviously, this is the federal program, but for us in the state, whether you're in Alabama, Georgia, New York, there needs to be a marketing effort so people across the world can know where those zones are. So those businesses who are those who want to start funds and everything, they know where to go to. But also areas that you and your state may know that nobody else knows. In Florida, we have a thing to where people always think about Orlando, they think about Miami or Tampa, but there's so many areas in Florida that people who are outside of Florida may not think about, such as Tuareg, Florida, such as Belglade, Pahokee, and areas that those who are from here know about, but that's really a key in terms of marketing the state that we do. So then, first and foremost, we view opportunity zones as a community investment. Our aim as a state is to put a spotlight on these opportunities and provide communities technical support. With that in mind, we are advocating resources to help make some concentrated marketing efforts around the state because everybody wants this to succeed. So with this being done, the best ways that we get legislators involved in opportunity zones at the state level, we tell them this is not about displacement or gentrification. People always ask me about enterprise zones and what they had in the past. This is totally different in the sense of this is really community driven from the inside. So here are 5 ways I would suggest that your communities can maximize the impact of opportunity zones. Number 1 is start by developing a marketable community plan. That can happen on the local level and the state level. Be willing to brag on the assets and advantages that your opportunity zone has. These zones, by their nature of the design, have some challenges, but every zone has something about it that it can offer market, transaction, and potential. So that your plan or perspective should brag about your community, tell of the assets, and tell what makes it special, whether it's workforce, education, whether you have HBCUs in your district. All that makes a difference as you market your opportunity zone. Number 2 is identify zone-specific needs. Figure out what is holding the zone back, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's water, or what specific roadblock has kept progress from taking hold. Then as part of your plan, demonstrate how a little custom intervention could overwhelm the roadblocks and leverage the distinctive economic assets. Number 3, identify community resources. View the opportunity as one of among the other capital sources and structure. That is where your local economic development officers are involved, your Chamber of Commerce, your Urban League, your NAACP, your colleges, universities. All of those come together in regards to making this successful, even if you want to start Opportunity Fund within your community. So this is one tool that you can use. And OZ investment should be one area among many in your quiver. Number 4, the tried and true formula that will work in opportunity zones and even outside them is to let human capital strategies become a part of your conversation. That was something that Jerron just said. So brick and mortar is a part of the goal, but the conversation is really about people and prosperity. We have to link capital investments to human capital strategies to maximize impact for lower income residents. So forge economic and social linkages between and among opportunity zones. So it's important in terms of the point number 5, to forge economic and social linkages between and among opportunity zones. It is important to see these zones a part of the greater community, the city and the state. These zones are not considered to be in isolation, but a part of the larger cohesive strategy that local communities are putting together. So find ways to make the power of 2 or more zones better than 1. So as this program is growing, as it's getting more popular every day, what is important on the local level and the state level is really critical in regards to driving the conversation. Businesses always ask me, Jamal, or people always ask me in Florida, Jamal, will this create displacement? Will this create gentrification? And that's not the case at all when you really look at the legislation and what it means. So as I talk with Jerron all the time about how we can get the word out, but how we can get people involved, the number 1 on the local level is marketing those zones to those communities or people within your community, but also the opportunity fund piece is so critical in regards to matching those funds up to those in the community who then want to take part of this. So with that being said, as I said earlier, in regards to what I do, even though I decided to not go into ministry, like my brothers, I decided that this was my ministry of helping people, of showing the world about those forgotten areas that we may not think about, that those in this room know about. And whether you're an official for a Republican or Democrat, it really doesn't matter, because this is really something that helps everybody across the board, whether it's rural, whether it's blue collar, whether it's urban. This is something that we are pushing forward, but also we want to make sure that you have the resources to succeed. Thank you.
Okay, again, thank you so much for those remarks. And again, I know it was helpful if we all didn't jot down those 5 tools that you spoke of. I'll just kind of go over in brevity. So develop our community plan is what we've been asked to do. Brag on the assets of our community as we kind of stress, what are some of those highlights of our community? What's unique about our community, and make sure we're tailoring that to the OZs. Identify the OZ needs, and number 3, identify the community resources, gather our stakeholders in terms of economic development, those who are working diligently in that area, and then again, the stress about human capital. Again, that point is raised, and then lastly, to forge those linkages in our community. So again, Mr. Sowell, thank you for being here. Thank you for those remarks. So we have come to the point of Q&A. I hope that we've prepared some questions to ask the leaders that we have before us in terms of the information that's been presented before us, and if you have any questions that perhaps were not addressed in the remarks that you've heard so far. So we're going to get ready to move into that. But before we do move into our Q&A session, I have both some housekeeping items that I'd like to mention, as well as I'd just like to highlight amongst all of our state CEOs who are here representing the respective states. We have, and I think worth also highlighting, we have Mr. David Haley, who I understand is the nephew of Alex Haley, and I think it's important for us to all say hello. Senator Haley here from Kansas is here. Thank you, and we've been talking about, we're having a conversation about lineage. That certainly takes us there. That's a special moment. And also, I understand we have Senator James Sanders from New York, who chairs the Committee on Banking, which is important because as we engage in this conversation about opportunity zones, again, as this goes to the market, we're going to be talking a lot about access to capital and banking and those lenders and those are who are going to be in position to make capital and make the financial resources available to communities and those who are considering the assets in their community. Senator Sanders, we're going to be looking to you certainly for guidance on access to capital. So with that said, again, let's move into the Q&A session. There are microphones in the center of the room towards the front that we're going to have everyone to, as you consider your questions, begin to, just kind of position yourself to the microphone so that we can answer, so we can start the Q&A. And before we start the Q&A, again, I said that there are some housekeeping items here that I wanted to mention. So just before that, the event has been determined. Madam Chair has asked us to announce that this event registration will be refunded. So Merry Christmas to everyone. That's our gift. That's the gift back to you. The registration that you paid for is going to be refunded. That is a hand clap, right? So like I said, move to the microphone so we can begin our Q&A. And also, there are some sign-in sheets in the center of each of the tables. Make sure that we have your contact information as information that you are hearing today and how we're going to communicate with you. It's important that we have the contact information. If you have not taken a moment to sign yourself in, please grab that sign-in sheet. Okay, we're getting a little excited about that registration fee here. But it's coming in the mail. Don't expect it, this week or anything, but it's coming. Okay, there's a clarification on that point.
Let me just clarify something, because y'all murmuring and murmuring. That that registration refund she just talked about, first and foremost, it ain't but $25. And it don't apply to the conference registration. It applies to this seminar, because you know me, I'm trying to generate revenue so that we can continue to provide you with these kinds of programs. Y'all have already paid through your registration to be up in here. We had community people who were so excited, unlike some of us, about the chance to get this knowledge that they were willing to pay $25. What we decided, because we're generous people, is it's not fair to charge community people $25, okay? So that's what that's about. And so I need y'all to be respectful. We got to move this through. If you got conversations, you need to take them outside, because this information is a unique opportunity. We want to be respectful to our guests. And if y'all ain't interested, don't be up in here talking. I'm very serious about that, because this is our opportunity to change or have input into the footprint of our community, the future of what our community is going to look like. So if you're not serious, you can go on while people are lining up to take questions, because it's hard to hear when you're having all these conversations. We clear? Is there clarity on the registration fee? Thank you so much. And look, David Haley was not an official part of the introduction. I don't know how he worked up on that. Senator Sanders is the chair of NBCSL's committee, and Adrian was going to introduce him, but all of us who know and love David Haley know how well he sucks up to people, okay? Thank y'all.
There we have it, Madam Chair. All right. All right, share the love. All right, so with that charge, thank you, Madam Chair, for that clarification. You know, the notes come in, but thank you for that clarification. So why don't we expeditiously move into our Q&A? We do have persons lined up to start that off. So why don't we start here to my right, and let's just go ahead.
Can I get 2 seconds here?
Sure, take your second.
I'm an ex-football guy, so I'm asking if you can allow me to just call a quick audible on the play. I know we heard state leadership, federal leadership, but I think it's important that you understand local leadership and how this stuff looks on the ground. Keith is actually broken up to speak after lunch, and then give his spiel, but I think it's important, as we talked about connectivity, to kind of see the connection between the three of us kind of working through these strategies. And so I would like to ask you to allow for him to maybe make some specific comments to this conversation and how it's working in Miami. We literally just spent 3 days walking through Liberty City, doing a lot of very innovative things to create that connectivity on the ground. And I think it's important for you to understand that this is all linked together. And if you would allow for him just to kind of make some comments now. Look, I'm going to stay around for questions. so I know you guys are going to eat lunch, but after lunch, I'll be here for questions and everything. So I'm not going to shortchange you on the questions at all. However, I think in the context of opportunity zones, it's important to kind of also hear that local perspective based off of what we just discussed, because that's going to help inform some of your questions. And so with that said, Keith Carswell.
All right. Mr. Carswell, if you will introduce yourself, because all of our, the other two have already been introduced and provided remarks. So the three will begin to take your questions. And if you have other questions outside of the three, we're all here to give you the very best of information, that we have for you today. Mr. Carswell, if you would introduce yourself.
All right. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Come on. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. All right. My name is Keith Carswell. I'd like to welcome you on behalf of Mayor Francis Suarez, who's Mayor of City of Miami. I am the advisor to the mayor on economic development and resiliency. What I tell people is I just get to have an opinion and not have to actually do the work. So as an advisor, as opposed to being a director. In short, the mayor would tell you that I'm his development coordinator. I deal with a lot of the major development and issues that they may have in terms of permitting. As Darin mentioned, I met him probably about 2 months ago. And let me back up a little bit also and give you a little bit of my background. I'm a Miami native, grew up in Liberty City, attended Charles Drew Middle, Miami Northwestern Senior High, Bulls playing for the state championship in our division this weekend. And from there, I attended Columbia University in New York. Grew up in Liberty City. I vividly remember the riots during the 80s, walking out of the house and looking at the sky and see the smoke bellowing up in the air, and looking at what was happening to my community that I grew up in and that I love. And so after graduating from Columbia, went into banking, worked with Southeast Bank. If any of you all ever remember Southeast Bank back in the day, did commercial lending. Had a couple of stints, worked in the city, doing public-private partnership development. And a lot of this today is what it's all about, where, one other thing I just want to say also, incidentally, Darin is a very modest brother. This week, at least in the Senate, and he's behind this, they approved permanent funding for HBCUs. And this is the brother that's been behind that. $260 million, I think? $250 million. But those are some of the things that this brother is doing, and it makes me very excited to kind of work with him on. Now, from a local perspective, it's great that they come up with the policy. It's great that they have the resources. The resources are kind of varied and out there. I'm going to tell you a little bit of some of the things that we've done and what I think is really the opportunity as part of the opportunity zone, no pun intended. We engage at the local level in public-private partnerships. So for example, if some of you are familiar with Midtown Miami, which is in an opportunity zone, and this was done a few years ago, it was a vacant 50-acre site right next to what is now the design district, which, and I'll tell you a little bit about that is just booming, which is just east of Wynwood, it's in Wynwood, and it's a neighborhood that is just booming. Well, the developer said that we want to develop this site. We're going to create certain number of jobs, but the numbers don't work. So at the local level, we created a community development district, which if you are a landowner, you basically tax yourself. It's kind of like an association, okay? So they created a CDD. And that CDD was going to issue bonds for the infrastructure, basically for the sewer lines, the roads that need to go in there. You know, when you buy your house, generally the roads are already there, the water is there, or a sewer connection, or depending on if you're in a rural area, you have septic tank. Well, in this instance, they said it's going to cost us about, I think, $35 million, roughly $50 million to put in that infrastructure, and the numbers won't work. Well, they created the CDD to tax themselves to pay for the infrastructure work, and then to layer that in terms of financing, we created a CRA, which is a taxing district. So now when they went to the market to issue bonds for the infrastructure improvements, because they had a taxing authority that was behind them that could pledge taxes that were coming in and pretty much guaranteed, that enhanced the quality of the bonds, and they got a favorable rate. In Miami now, and so now what you have is just south of there, and this is a little extreme case. I was telling someone, my god sister's other god brother, but I'm the favorite god brother. They have a little house, 50 by 100 feet, standard house, right next to the design district. And they're watching everybody who are selling on their block. And they're kind of hanging on to it, and you got some people say, well, I'm not going to sell, I'm just going to die in this house. Those little homes are selling for, per house, $800,000 at this point. And they say, we're waiting for until it hits $1 million. Because in that area, as part of the plan, they're going to put in a boutique hotel. Now, they have all the designers moving in there, and Miami's very dynamic that way. Magic City Development, which is in an opportunity zone, recently approved with zoning. We got very involved. And there is a concern, and there is a legitimate concern about gentrification. It is real, it is legitimate, and what has happened also with the designations, kind of an unintended consequence, is that when they got the designation, property values went up because of speculation about what could possibly happen with an opportunity zone. And then if you look at the numbers and you Google and you try to figure out, well, how much is out there, because they talk about investments. So it is estimated, and let me back up. Opportunity, people who have capital gains, if you bought something for $1 and you wanted to sell it, and now you sell it for $3. So now you have $2 in capital gain, depending on what that asset is. You can put that and you can defer that investment, that capital gains that you would pay 20-something% on. You can invest it in a vehicle that will invest it in a fund that will invest in an opportunity zone, which could be a business. People think about real estate, but there are business opportunities. And that $2, if you hang on to it for 10 years, can become $8. And when you pull that out at the end of 10 years, you don't pay taxes on that. So as a result, when you take a look at the potential availability of resources to go into an opportunity zone, there is an estimated $3 to $6 trillion out there. I didn't say billion, 3 to 6. The highest number I've heard is 6.1 trillion. So then the issue becomes at the local level, what can a government do to kind of channel those resources? Kind of like judo, you know, if someone's stronger than you or bigger than you, you don't try to meet that force head on, you just try to channel it. And so as part of channeling it, when the developers who were looking at developing Magic City, which is probably going to be about a $2.5 billion development in a traditionally low-income area in Little Haiti, which is also one of the highest points of land because it's right near the railroad tracks. And when they built Miami or Flagler, they rode the railroad tracks on the highest ridges And everything else to the east and to the west was swampland back in the day. So when we talk about global warming, literally, if you live on the tracks, you're kind of in most cases, you're at the highest elevation point in your city, at least down here. So when we talk about the impacts of global warming, and you got sunny days on Miami Beach where they have seawater percolating through the storm drains, they're in trouble. But in these urban cores, those are some opportunities. And so the developer is looking at, we're going to create so many jobs. They're going to bring in probably a hotel at some point. They want to do a technology hub. There is a magnet high school that we went to take a look at. They have a Mac lab. They have a robotics program that we're partnering with a brother who was very successful in the technology space, and he's going to give back, and he's going to fund that. But one of the things that we're going to do is that we're going to partner them with probably Florida Memorial University and some local stuff to help kids fund that and build a pipeline. And as we're putting it, for women and minorities to go into the technology space that is being developed at iTech, not iTech, but at Magic City, because that's one of the components that they're charged with. In addition to that, and I'm going to go, they are for affordable housing. When they pull their permits, there's a percentage that will go into an affordable housing trust fund. And over a period of time, as they develop it, it's going to get $31 million is going into a fund. And that fund is in the entity that's set up is going to consist of people from the community, local people from the community, who will determine how those dollars are spent. And hopefully there'll be leverage for affordable housing. So those are some of the things that we're doing, at least at the ground level. And I look forward to maybe answering any more questions you may have on that. Thank you.
So thank you against that backdrop, what's going on locally. So why don't we go back to our questions? We still have someone in position, and we're going to take the first question. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the information. Regina Goodwin from Tulsa, Oklahoma.
The microphone a little closer.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hi, I'm Regina Goodwin, State Representative out of Tulsa, Oklahoma. And the issue for us is we've had folks at the table, and what we're finding is that what was meant for revitalization has become gentrification. And when you talk about the capital gains, tax exemptions, we're watching developers sweep into our areas, buy up the property, buy up the land, and ultimately what was intended for good, very wealthy private investors are really benefiting. Yep. I think the question is, what can we do realistically to stop the onslaught of very wealthy folks that can go wherever they choose, and they get the green light from folks that they're partnering with, right? And so what we're left with in the community is, when they talk about the housing that's going to be created, we're finding that the housing is further out in less desirable areas. They then take over where we were. So I'm asking, and I appreciate everything that everybody's doing, but the dollars that are spent on getting the word out about it, we don't see the reward afterwards. We can get all the information we want, go to all the task force meetings, collaborate. When it's all said and done, we don't get the reward out of it. So what realistically can we do when we're at the table and we're planning and we're seeing our voter base eroded? When all of this happens, the cascading effect of it is difficult.
I think that's a very legitimate question, and I think perhaps others may have that same question on their mind. So why don't we start with some response to that?
A lot of that is, affordable housing is one of the biggest challenges that we have in Miami. City of Miami voters about 4 years ago approved a $400 million bond issuance, general bond obligation. Within that, there's $100 million specifically for affordable housing. So one of the challenges that we have is, how do we, $100 million may sound like a lot, but it's really not a lot. And the question becomes, how do we leverage that $100 million? We've contracted with FIU Metropolitan Center. They're wrapping up a master plan that they're developing. We found through that study that, at least in Miami, 71% of the residents in the city of Miami are renters. We found that there's a significant number of people that are cost burdened, meaning that they spend, housing cost burdened, meaning that they spend over 30% of their monthly household income on housing needs. And so one of the opportunities when development occurs, there's inclusionary zoning. When developers, they can buy land, people can sell property, kind of the American way to a large extent. But when they come in for enhancements or come in for upzoning, that's when it's the local municipality's opportunity to say, well, if you want to build, let's say, 1,000 units, what percentage is going to be designated or set aside for affordable housing? Because a municipality cannot stop a private transaction. A municipality cannot stop you from building what you are entitled to. However, when you go through zoning to upzone that property, then a local municipality can weigh in to say, well, is this consistent with the vision that we have for the area? And if you want this, then you need to get that, then we need that. And so that is what we have done in terms of inclusionary zoning. We're looking at, we're working through the Opportunity Zone Summit that we put together. We've looked at trying to streamline a HUD D2 program where they provide 40-year construction, financing, amortization, and we're trying to get them, and we're putting up $25 million, and we're asking HUD to match the $25 million so we can have mixed income housing. Because one of the things we don't want also is just to have all poor people in one location, because then now you're warehousing the poor. And we believe in order to have a vibrant community, you need to have workforce housing, which is 80% to 120% AMI. You need to have low income, 60% of AMI or less. And so you need to have a mixture in order to maintain a vibrant community. And so those are, I think, some of the things at the local level that can be done.
Can I add a little bit to that? So, and I'm going to let you,
'Cause I
of
just
course,
want one
ask
follow-up.
an additional question. What he just described there was a local strategy to kind of deal with a local problem. This is federal policy, and it's just a tool to bring more capital to solve problems. But having a local strategy allows for us to take our resources and work with the municipality to create that social impact. And that's going to look differently across the country. Right. And the interesting thing is that, since I was like a kid, they've always talked about like they're about to change downtown and then move people out. The Opportunity Zone legislation came about because gentrification and displacement was happening. It was happening way before the legislation came into being, right? And so we wanted to give power back to the localities to figure out local solutions to local problems. And we did that experiment, of course, with empowering governors. Now, of course, hindsight's 2020, we think that like we need to do more to have local involvement in understanding those zones. And it was a hard process because this thing passed very rapidly. Some governors took certain approaches that maybe sped up certain areas that were already changing. Others were a lot more strategic and worked with their localities, and we're learning a lot from that. But at the heart of it, and something that's extremely important is that local leaders like you can design a strategy to kind of leverage that capital to do the social good. And that's what we're having a conversation about. And what you're seeing right now is, like I said before, all pre-market activity. Like the rules get finalized in like 2 weeks. We're talking about 10 years time horizon for these opportunity zones. When he mentioned, it's like 80 or 100 billion, it can be more than that invested in any given year. But we estimate 80 to 100 billion dollars of capital is out there nationally every year, maybe more than that over the next 10 years. That if you do 100 billion a year for 10 years, that's $1 trillion. So that's that untapped $3.5 to $6 trillion in capital gains that's just sitting there, right? So we're incentivizing that money to go into some of these communities to do social good. But you have to design a strategy to figure out how we can best leverage that for social good. That's why this is like the greatest public-private partnership, the country's ever seen. It's new. It's a whole new market, and we're going to learn a lot from it. And in fact, we're going to change some things along the way when we learn from the marketplace. And so that's what we're getting feedback on. But we need your help because we don't want to create a one-size-fits-all approach because all of these localities are so different. We want to give that flexibility back to you all, but we need your help to kind of help channel that. So
I'd just like to say that we've been involved. We're at the table, very engaged. So we are doing our part. What I think the concern is, again, as you look at the investment and you look at the private end of this, that's where the buck stops. And when you talk about the people and the housing, again, those houses are further out. You're eroding a base, a tax base, and a voter base. That's ultimately what comes out of this. And guess what? We've talked about mixed-use retail also, and we can't have all poor people in one area. Well, when they start getting displaced, right, and the very poor people that are electing us that we care about, we could do with our federal dollars, what we could do is invest in those communities as they are, invest in those homes where they are, help them build up, right, instead of displacing them. And that way, you have more direct involvement with that community that you're talking about revitalizing. Those are ideas that are on the table that often get overlooked. Direct infusement of dollars right where the folks are hurting, right, as opposed to, as you talk about, dealing with the private investors that come in. It's our dollars. Those federal dollars, that's our money coming out of our pocket. So it's not like some mystical, magical place. And I'm saying there are different ways to look at it, but I don't see those ideas ever actually being implemented. We talk about it for decades, but what happens is we keep getting the same results. I want this to work, but the reality is we're hurting, we're at the table, and I think we're gonna have to be a little more creative on how we're gonna have that leverage, because right now we don't have that leverage.
And I think the concern, Mr. Sowell, as you go into your response is, you know, if the idea is about public-private partnership, how much say will the public, you know, have in this? Because the dollars, no doubt, are coming from the private sector, and those that controls the money, right? If they control the resources, likely they're going to control the outcome. And so I think the heart of the matter here is defining how the public, you know, in this case, is going to play a real role, something that's significant. And when we talk about the impact, the social impact, I think that's what we're hearing from the senator, and I'd like for us to really address that in a real way.
So to your point, and I think you raised a very important point, you know, that this kind of infrastructure, for lack of a better word, has existed for decades. And we've had public investment. You know, I was telling you, we spend billions of dollars a year in these communities already, right? And even with billions of dollars a year, that hasn't trickled down to the average person, right? What we've opened up is additional private capital, partner with that public capital to work out a strategy for social good. But in order to do that, what I'm asking you is to partner with us to have a united public strategy. So it's been disconnected. Like you have a person doing some community development piece over here, and then another person doing some economic development over there, and there's no united strategy around that. You know, so what we did is, we did just what you asked for. We put, people don't know this exists, and I'm telling you that it does. We put almost $20 billion of federal resources for economic development, for community development, for workforce development, for entrepreneurship. And when I say economic development, that's all the affordable housing resources that we have at the federal government. That's all the EDA dollars. That's all the transportation and infrastructure dollars. But some of the resources we have, like CDBG, those things are given to the state, right? And then the state can control that. But if the state kind of took their CDBG money along with the federal money that I talked about and worked on that together, that's the bucket of money that you're talking about. You know, but it's going to look differently all across the country. And that's what I'm trying to articulate. OpportunityZones.gov, you go to that tab, you go to the local leaders page, you're going to see 100 170 agency actions that gives priority points for grants, loan programs, all across the country that are in opportunity zones. What we want to encourage is two things. That's our federal commitment to that you asked for social impact. What we're asking is states to do the same thing. States to take their dollars and commit, and localities to take their dollars and commit, like Keith just explained. That's why we have the three of us up here to show you like a real example where you have state, federal, and local working together to harness, like he said this, taking that capital and kind of massaging it into a way where we can create that social impact.
I'm going to make just one statement. I know a lot of folks got to talk.
And I'm sorry, I know my charge has been given here to move our program, Mr. Smith, to move this alone. So we're going to maybe have to table this for a little bit here.
I'll be around to kind of talk
correct.
about it. So,
and I was about to say, I know you've committed to being around throughout the remainder of the time together in the interest of getting everyone's question in so that we can, really have a dialogue here. I'm going to move to our next person that's lined up here and in position to ask a question. Thank you all. Thank you for your question. Thank you, gentlemen, for your response. We'll take your question.
All right, good morning. My name is Darin Kendrick from the great state of Georgia, serving in the Georgia House of Representatives. And my question is about access to capital, because to me, opportunity zones have potential to increase the wealth gap. So one of the things that I do in my day job is raise money for companies, particularly for opportunity zones, as a securities attorney. And so the same people that are raising money for these opportunity zones are the same sort of Silicon Valley VC firms, rich white guys that have already accumulated wealth. And so they're coming in and they're making even more money off these opportunity zones. So my question is, what opportunities are there to get people who are in these opportunity zones actually making money off the opportunity zones that the community is supposed to benefit from?
So then, as I said earlier about the opportunity funds, what we have your state should either create a list of those opportunity funds and how their contact information, who they are, and what are the registered opportunity funds in your state. Perfect example. Years ago in Gainesville, I was the first vice president of the NBCSL, and I was youth council advisor. And for us, what we did in Gainesville was more, I knew all the leaders in the communities of the zones, who was who. And for us, if somebody did not have the best interests of the community, we would then call them out or then make sure that they weren't the ones who were representing that specific zone. So in each state should have either a list online or something to where those in those communities who are affected can access or at least contact those who have those funds already registered in each zone. So the main part that a state can do is show you who are the opportunity funds and what's the best way for you to contact them to tell them, hey, I am the president of the Urban League. I am a state rep. I am someone who has weight in this community, and here's why you should work with me, because I have the best interest of this area because I'm from here.
And if I can chime in, even though it is a small player, I guess from the standpoint in the scheme of things, relatively in terms of hierarchy, local government drives this. At the end of the day, it depends on your local leadership in terms of how successful or unsuccessful this is going to be. I've been with this brother for the last couple of days. I have taken him to, we've gone to Everglades Correctional Facility about homecomers. We've looked at other projects. We went to a project yesterday. One of the first projects we looked at also was a 226 elderly housing unit, seniors 55 and over. The land was owned by the city of Miami. We gave it to a community development corporation. They got, in addition to that, the city kicked in $800,000 in home dollars. There were some state dollars that went into that. That's a public-private partnership with a local non-for-profit that's providing safe, clean, and sanitary housing for seniors in an opportunity zone. Secretary Carson made the visit a couple of months ago, and they kind of came to see to closure. The local government drives this. When people buy land, and they want to come and upzone the property. The local government can determine whether there's inclusionary zoning, meaning that they're going to put affordable housing in there, or senior housing, or if it's a large tract of land, even give the local government an acre or two for affordable housing. Local government have an opportunity to drive the outcomes, whether it's successful or unsuccessful. They are a tool. They are a resource. And it's up to the local government to have a vision to figure out how they can tap into that for their local needs. And it's going to vary. When I talk about the $100 million for affordable housing, there are 7 different strategies that we have to utilize that. So it's not one size fit all, even within the local municipality. But the charge and the challenge, if there could be and I'm not sure if it's a paradigm shift or not, but think of it this way. They are a tool, they are a resource. You know what's happening, you have your finger on the pulse of your community. You know what you need. I can't come in and tell you what you need. He can't tell you what you need. He can't tell you what you need. You know what you need. And then to figure out what is it, go to that opportunitygov.com website, figure out what kind of funding, what kind of grants out there, and see if it can fit a project that you're thinking about or you're contemplating. And then if it doesn't and the regs aren't right, give Darin a call and say, hey, look, because this is an opportunity zone, I think you ought to change the regs on this. I think you should consider this. I think that, hey, look, because I've told them already, let's do a demonstration project, meaning that you don't typically do this, but because it's in an opportunity zone and you say that this is something that is important to you, well, tell you what, let's do a demonstration project on X, Y, Z. Local government, I think, have an opportunity to drive this outcome, the success or failure, not them. It's up to you.
Okay, thank you for that. The gentleman here on the right at the microphone, your question?
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. I'm Arthur Ellis. I'm brand new to the Senate of Maryland. Never ran for anything before, and this is my 11th month in. I'm a CPA by trade, military officer, and so I want to thank you, gentlemen, for taking the lead. Now I know where opportunity zones came from. Mr. Smith, thank you for doing what you're doing. And I'm here to say that I want to echo the comments of the 2 ladies that went before me as far as creating opportunities for the lesser of these, for individuals in our communities. Tax credits really won't do that. You got to have the financial wherewithal to take advantage of these credits. And so for building up opportunities for entrepreneurs in our community, we need more infusion of dollars, entrepreneurial dollars for individuals to go in to build up this business. And my committee in the Senate is focused on doing just that, because I noticed in Maryland, we have probably 15 economic development programs. And it's very disjointed. And we're putting a bill this year to make it simple and easy, where each part of the community, each part of the state can get some of these funds. So I would want you to expand on basically, if I'm wrong, tell me I'm wrong, that it's not just tax credits for these OZs, but it's actually grants. And basically, how can these funds be pulled into the local community if it's not just tax credits? So could you please expand on that with the opportunities? Is it for grants? Is it just tax credits, or whatever?
Sure.
Thanks.
Well, one, let me give one clear clarification. This is not a tax credit at all. This is incentive that brings capital in on the front end. It's tax deferral. That's what it is. You can defer taxes and create an opportunity fund, and we have incentives, and the funds have to invest in these low-income census tracts. So it's a little different than anything else we've ever had before. Enterprise zones, new market tax credit, were all tax credit initiatives with a cap at like new markets was like 3.5 billion or something like that over 10.
So can individuals in say, entrepreneurial spirit?
Let me answer your question.
Okay, sure, go ahead.
So I just wanted to give a clarification there.
Okay, thank you, sorry.
It's two different things going on right now at once, and I think that's the confusion, right? This is a private sector tool to incentivize investment into low-income areas. It's basically access to capital, right? Capital that hadn't been there before, and that capital can be used. We're talking a lot about real estate, but the founder, the idea capital that brought this into fruition came from a guy named Sean Parker, who started Facebook and Napster. And he realized all the venture capital was focused in places like Silicon Valley and New York and other places. And that capital needed to be moved, access to capital, to create small businesses and emerging technology, not only in those locations, but in the most distressed communities, to give capital to the innovations of the future, right? That's what created opportunity zones, alongside of Senator Tim Scott that say, look, we need more capital or gap financing, like a TIF on the federal level, to initiate federal investment. So that's one thing that's just like very targeted towards the private sector, and that has to make economic sense. That's why it's sustainable. The other piece, you talk about grants and everything like that, that's all the work of the White House Opportunity and Revitalization Council. We've taken about up to $20 billion of federal resources and focused that on top of the private sector dollars into these zones. And so all of those tools can be leveraged. And so a person like yourself as a state legislator, it's like, how do I leverage the capital that's coming from the private sector and the grants that's coming from the federal government, and maybe use some tools in my toolbox to empower my community? And that's what my state and local leaders are talking about, a strategy. And the interesting thing is in Maryland has been one of the most robust states at the forefront of this, because you had the governor who designed a website, one of the best websites on opportunity zones, where you can actually see the marketplace. You can see the marketplace where there's an investor that needs, who wants to make an investment in an opportunity zone, and you have an individual that wants to get access to capital. And they're actually having discussions right now, on that website. So it's all public. But that came from like state leadership, and that's what he was talking about, where it opened up kind of that network and opportunity. And then you had local level, the city of Baltimore, for example, worked with a philanthropic organization and hired an economic development expert. The city didn't have to pay for it. The philanthropic organization loaned that person there who was an expert on economic development. And since then, they've had like 70 deals with social impact. I'm talking about things like workforce housing, but I'm also talking about business incubators. I'm also talking about healthy foods, restaurants for reentry individuals who want to start a business. I mean, the whole Rolodex. The tool is flexible to be leveraged all different types of ways, but it takes local leadership to figure out how to best harness it. And so what I'm articulating to you is that it's both. It's both of your things. And the thing is, then you need to figure out, as a new state legislator, how can I leverage these tools to empower my community?
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. We'll go here.
Yeah, thank you. Steve Bradford from California State Senator, Chair of Banking and Finance. And Ms. Clark, you briefly touched upon it, but it's been absent from the discussion, is the role and responsibility of banks. And as Chair of Banking, CRA, we passed CRA a number of years, Community Reinvestment Act. Why aren't these banks being obligated to invest in those communities as the legislation stated? And we would have more than enough funding. I challenge any of you legislators to go back in your district and see the money that Bank of America, Chase, Wells Fargo has invested in your community, and it will be zero under the Community Reinvestment Act. So the funding is there, so it's not a question not only to this administration, but to all the federal government, when are we going to hold those banks accountable? Second, I passed a cannabis social equity bill in California, and it's for those communities that have been impacted by the war on drugs, and they're African American and brown communities, pretty much where the same opportunity zone is going to be. Will those funds and assistance be available for those folks who want to be want to enter into cannabis space?
So, to your second question, yes. DOJ has over 50 different grants committed to opportunity zones. Department of Labor has all their reentry grants focused on opportunity zones. SBA is going to make a commitment that I'm working with them on right now. We just hired someone to focus just on small business work for the Revitalization Council so that people who are returning citizens can start businesses. I mean, with Keith, we visited a community development entity that works with home governors. You talk a little bit about that.
Okay. In Miami, we have Circle of Brotherhood, and they actually, people who've been in the system, who've come home, they not only provide employment opportunities for I guess, the brothers, but they also have recently contracted with 3 local law enforcement municipalities, Miami Gardens, Miami-Dade County, and the city of Miami, to engage in police training, believe it or not. So, which is a real interesting kind of combination. The local school board member, Dorothy Bendross-Mendengal, who some of you may know, actually gave them a surplus school. So they actually have an asset, a school. They have career resource moving in, which provide employment opportunities, as well as a couple other local agencies. And so it's a community-based organization. Then they have groups that go out daily on the street, knocking on doors, providing resources, state, federal, local resources for people who may have an issue with Social Security, who may have an issue with their food stamps issues, whatever social services people need. They actually go door to door in the community as part of that effort. And so again, this is at the local level, and these are some things that can be done with I think a little creativity and a little, gumption.
And after we did that walk through, and I learned the local need, we're now connecting them with federal resources, because so many times good organizations like that are so busy doing the work, they don't have time to hire a lobbyist to come to Washington for the dollars we have. And we end up funding organizations that have professional lobbyists, and it never actually touches our community. And so we've been to over 50 cities, so this is not, these conversations we're having here, we've done it on the local level throughout the country. And we're going to continue to do that. We hired an executive director, Scott Turner, who's been to over 50 different cities, local, rural, tribal, all across the country. And you're from California. We've been out to California working with Solar Impact, which you probably heard about, and what they're doing in South Central LA to kind of create these hubs. But those resources are there, and our convening power, we're leveraging it to create that connectivity, that I talked about before, because we're very intentional on creating those outcomes.
What about the CRA?
To your first question on CRA, OCC is going to put out rules that will give additional incentives to opportunity zones and then update CRA requirements. And so we're waiting for OCC to kind of talk more about that. But as a result of that, a lot of banks, big banks, small banks, medium-sized banks, are all engaged on opportunity zones. Many of them are waiting to see what the final rules look like and figuring out on the wiggle room. But certainly through Joseph Otting, who's the head of the OCC, he's putting out rule making to modernize CRA in a way that can create that partnership that you just described on the ground, and also additional incentives into opportunity zones.
But they just failed at CRA, period, over the last 2 years. Why didn't we build?
Well, I mean, we can only do so much. Yeah, we can only do so much with CRA because at the end of the day, certain things need to be done statutorily through Congress. But yes, they get the CRA credit for investment in opportunity zones, and so that is coming out, and you'll see the rulemaking on that.
Okay, so thank you for that. We're going to move to the next question here to the right. Thank you.
Thank you. Secretary of Commerce Sowell, I was directing this conversation towards you. Your team came to visit me about 3 weeks ago to talk about opportunity zones. And one of the things that was interesting to me was the creation of community foundations so that people within the community could pool their money together to leverage some of the things that were taking place. So I would love to hear more about how we can get information on getting community foundations formed, because a lot of us have investors who came from the communities that we're currently in and would like to know how to pull things together from across the state. Like our state has I'm from Florida, by the way, sorry, and thank you very much for being in my county. That is my question and my concern. How do we do it ourselves? And then the conversation that I heard a lot here was in reference to concerns that I think the gentleman keeps trying to express, which is your cities have codes. And they are, my congressman, I had the conversation with my congressman, then I had my conversation with my state team, and then I had my conversation with my county and my cities. And you have city codes, you have to shore up your city codes to prepare for what's coming. And that is our first line of defense, and that was what my congressman told me. He said, shore up your codes. And we can't do that on a state level, but our cities can do it, and our counties can do it. So please tell me, Secretary of Commerce, what we can do in reference to community foundations and pooling our money together.
Okay, so here in Florida, we just had an election last year. So it was the previous administration that picked the opportunity zones in 2017 and 18. And then now we're still in the first year of the new administration. So now what we're doing now in Florida is that we first just made our website, establishing a database about all of the counties and all the opportunity funds and zones. So as we go into the second year of this administration, now we are pulling together all the resources and all the communities who are interested in it. So we'll have it up and running in 2020. So now we're still in the first 10, 11 months of this new administration. So as things are forming and as we're trying to get the information from the past administration and merge it with what we're doing as we move forward, we'll then have a robust plan for 2020 as we work with the White House and work with our partners around Florida. So now the first step for us was to tell people where the opportunity zones were, who were the opportunity funds, but also now get the players involved around the state of Florida as we move forward.
Okay, thank you for that. We're moving to the speed round now because we want to get every question. I see 3 people positioned to the mic, so we're going to ask for brevity both in your questions and brevity in the response so that we get through the remainder of the questions. The gentleman to the left, thank you.
Yeah, you wait for me and now you want to speed up. It's okay. My name is Roderick Harvey. I'm a partner with a CPA firm. We specialize in auditing municipal governments. And so we invited, through the leadership of Mayor Hazel Rogers, the city of Lauderdale Lakes, who's done a great job. We've contacted all of our cities, and they've done a great job of being at the front of this. The city of Lauderdale Lakes, and they have a representative, Celeste Dunmore. My questions, ABC, will be very pointed. First of all, will the December 31st date be extended? Point 2, IRS Form 8996, is it final? Next question, the calculation for the metric of 90% to self-certify, does that include cash? Can you include cash? And then the last point is, it mentions in the legislation, a corporation or a partnership, can one use an LLC?
Okay, very pointed questions. We have 4.
I'll be quick. Lightning round. Last question, yes.
LLC?
All right. Correct. Any type of business partnership. Your question before that, that will be clarified in the final rules. You're talking about aggregating assets and what assets qualify. Your second question was?
The IRS form.
Also will be finalized in the final rules that'll come out before the end of the year. Your first question, and that's a big one because there's been a lot of misinformation about that. The deadline for one piece of the incentives ends at the end of this year. One piece of the incentive. The heart and the 3 big pieces of the incentive goes on all the way up to 2026. And so you can literally take advantage of it day before, and even 6 months ramp up your fund. It end up being a year. So you're talking about really 2027. And that's the heart of the legislation. That's the other 3 incentives is the 10% step up for investments for 5 years. You know, the tax deferral in itself, which is huge, and then the 10-year forgiveness. That all is still in play after the end of this year. The only incentive is that small extra 5% step up if you do a 7-year investment, and that's it. And there was a lot of misinformation. Everybody was like, "Oh, I got to do my opportunity fund stuff at the end of this year," and that's false. And so I'm glad you asked that question.
All right, thank you. The gentleman here to the right, your question, please.
Yes, State Senator James Sanders Jr., Chair of Banking, New York State. Looking forward to catching up with my California colleague. But I'm also Chair of Economic Development for the NBCSL. Under the enlightened leadership of our president, we started looking at this matter close to a year ago. And I want to refer all of our colleagues to the resolution that we had made on this issue, which may take in many of the concerns that you have. This is the first resolution, and I'm sure there will be more resolutions going forward. The administration has already said that they would take a look at this resolution, and we were going to hand it to them. There are many things that would make it better. My own quick contribution would be a pool of money needs to be given to the state so that they can use eminent domain. If the state and or the city does not have the money to buy this, then the speculators will drive this up. You won't be able to deal with gentrification without having a pool of money where we can deal with it. And that's my contribution. Thank you, Madam President, and thank you to the panel. It's a great panel.
Thanks so
Thank
much.
you.
Can I make one comment to that?
Briefly.
I'm going to give you a little brief jewel that's going to be in the final rules. Municipalities that own land, there's going to be rules around additional flexibilities and incentives that you will have for owning that land that will give you a competitive leg up. And so I'll leave it at that. And then when we have the final rules, happy to come back with a colleague from Treasury to help you walk through your opportunity zone strategies.
All right, Madam Chairwoman, you heard that? He's willing to come back, so we'll get some further clarification upon the,
Still
this
money
coming
to
back,
the
so we'll
state
hold you to
and
that.
the city. For those who were late in owning land, they still need to get into the game. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our last question, last and final question
Yes.
for this segment. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'll try to be brief. Antonio Hayes from the state of Maryland, representing Baltimore City. I think the opportunity zone is a great tool, and I agree with you. It really depends on the local and state and how we direct that fund. Last session, I had a piece of legislation that provided for just regular people as opposed to those people with the great wealth and have an opportunity for capital gains tax to invest. We were unsuccessful, but we were able to structure a strategy where if there was vacant property in neighborhoods where there would be a local greater incentive. My question is really around scale. So I'm looking for what we tried to do for individuals, say a group of young professionals that have discretionary funds pool their money together to get a local benefit where we could have local people from that community invest in it. Have you seen anywhere in the country or any of the local jurisdictions where the scale has been identified to provide a local investment to leverage whatever's happened around the opportunity zones?
Yes, that's a long answer to the question. But seeing the projects that happen in a place like Erie, Pennsylvania, that's been historically underinvested for years, or you may have heard of this guy named Derek Morrison. He made headlines. Derek Morgan. He made headlines throughout the country because he was an NFL player who started his own opportunity fund and kind of got investments going. Look up his video on Coatesville, Pennsylvania, a place that you wouldn't even think about like investments flowing into. But through his local leadership, he's creating a social impact. Another great example is Nipsey Hussle, right? Nipsey Hussle, through the leadership of David Gross, created an opportunity fund to buy his community and developed a strategy around that. And so you see people like T.I. Doing that in places like Atlanta. And so that's happening all over the place and growing.
Okay, all right. With that said, just quickly, Mr. Smith wanted to ask, is the commenting period closed? The comment period?
Yes, the commenting period is
Okay.
closed. We're moving to final, but it's been based off of, and some of you probably have commented already, We did two notice of proposed rulemakings to kind of get more feedback from municipalities and from private sector stakeholders, and now we're moving the final rule now to create that certainty. So you're going to see a lot more activity after those rules come out, because now you have like final rules to determine how to best move in opportunity zones. And so, like I said, all the information that you're getting now is not that you're too late. I want you to think that like, man, I should have been. It literally just started, and all the activity that you've seen up in this point has been pre-market activity.
Okay. All right, wonderful. Thank you again, gentlemen, for your engaging responses to all the questions. Thank you to our state legislators for your questions. Lunch is prepared and awaiting us. So just a reminder that 30 minutes into your lunch, we're going to go back into our conversations. So we'll allow you 30 minutes to, to get yourself nourished, and then we're going to go back into session to further the conversation. So with that said, lunch is prepared and waiting for us, and we're going to have lunch. Bon appetit, everyone.